I'm starting a new book today called The Fall of Fergal, The First Unlikely Exploit. A word to the wise. This is at the beginning of the book. There's one thing we need to get straight before any of us get started. Me with the writing and you with the reading, and that is this. No matter where you think the events in this book take place, you're wrong. Plain and simple. No room for argument. Just because I have the McNallys speaking English, it doesn't mean they're from an English-speaking country. If you're reading a translated version of the book, it doesn't mean that they actually spoke in the language you're reading either. No, the events in this book took place somewhere none of you has ever been. How can I be sure? Because I'm the author, that's how, and we'll hear no more about it. Discussion closed. And as for the McNallys' names, I know they're strange, but I can't go and change them just to make you happy, now can I? That's what they're called, so you'll just have to live with it. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy this, the first of their unlikely exploits. Philip Ardagh. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. That's from A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Here's the prologue, the beginning. Philip! What? Wake up! Huh? Wake up, the book started. Started? Yes, what do you mean started? We've already had the title page, the copyright blurb, the dedication, no one ever reads, your word to the wise, and the quotation. You mean, yes, we're on to the story part. Blimey. You'd better get on with it. I'd better. Good luck. Thanks. Chapter 1. The very last words young Fergal McNally heard in his life were, "Don't lean out of that window." The very last sounds were probably the air whistling past his sticky-out ears as he fell the 14 stories, the honk of traffic horns below, getting nearer and nearer, of course, and possibly the sp of the splat he himself made as he hit the pavement. Fergal certainly wouldn't have heard more than the sp, though, because by the time the lat part had followed, he would have been well and truly dead. The person who'd shouted the "Don't lean out" warning, good and loud, but far too late, was Fergal's older sister Jackie. Jackie really was an older sister. Some people, twins usually, have older sisters just minutes older than them. Lots of people have older sisters a good few years older than them. But Fergal's sister Jackie was old enough to be his mother, which was kind of handy because he didn't have a real mother. It had been down to Jackie to bring up the rest of them. You know, feed them, clothe them, stop them from falling out of windows, that kind of thing. Of course, their father could have brought them up, but he was a useless dad. He even went so far as to get a note from his doctor saying that he was excused parenting and left everything for poor old Jackie to do. He kept himself busy by collecting empty bottles. They were full when he first got them, but were certainly empty by the time he'd finished with them. He very rarely spoke to anyone except that man in the bottle shop and to shout at Jackie to tell her how useless she was at everything. He would hide in what he called the back room, though it was more to the side than the back if you counted the front bit of the apartment as being the part that faced the road. He even had his meals in the back room, whilst Jackie fed her brothers and sister, once a day, around a big circular table in the kitchen. Rufus McNally, that was their father's name, often liked to add to his empty bottle collection during meal times and would attract Jackie's attention to bring him another full one by throwing something at the wall dividing the back room, which was really a side room, from the kitchen. Sometimes it'd be a bottle he'd just emptied. Sometimes it might be a boot. Once he picked up the cat, but Smokey was no fool, and with a few swift strokes of the paw and claw, made it absolutely clear to Captain Rufus that she was by no means a cat of the throwing across the room variety. You see, Smokey was a working cat, not a pet. She let the McNally children stroke her and let them love her, but they didn't feed her. It's not that they were mean, it's just that there was barely enough food for themselves without feeding a cat as well. Smokey ate the mice and rats that were unwise enough to stop scuttling behind the baseboard and make a break across an open floor. There's a picture of the cat and Rufus McNally. Once, Fergal's dad Rufus threw his own wooden leg at the wall to attract Jackie's attention. He'd looked around for something else to throw but couldn't find anything that wasn't furry and purry, so he'd unscrewed his leg and chucked it with such force that it not only cracked the plaster in the wall, but also split the leg itself right along the grain. Thereafter, it always looked like an overripe fruit with a burst skin. In the days before any of the children, apart from Jackie, had been born, Rufus McNally had been not only a brilliant sailor, but also a war hero. He'd been a happy, smiling fellow whom, which was simply a who with an M at the end, everyone had been proud to know. He'd been awarded more gold medals for bravery than he had clean shirts to pin the medals on, and then he'd lost his leg. He didn't lose his leg in the way that people lose umbrellas at busy train stations. No, Captain Rufus McNally lost his leg in such a way that he couldn't simply go to the lost and found and collect it. He didn't lose his leg in an explosion, and he'd been in many of those. He didn't lose it when he was clinging to wreckage in shark-infested waters, and he'd found himself in that predicament on more than one occasion. He lost his leg on the 4th occasion he found himself in a sinking ship. On the previous 3 occasions, he'd done heroic deeds to save others trapped as their vessels went down. On this final occasion, it was he who was trapped. His ship had been torpedoed by an enemy submarine and was sinking fast, but he was going nowhere because his leg was caught under a mass of twisted metal. So Captain Rufus McNally did a very brave thing. As the water poured into the cabin where he was trapped, knowing that if he couldn't free himself he would definitely die, he decided to cut off his own leg. Sorry, but there you are. I'd love to say that the solution was to skip happily with fluffy bunnies with nice music in the background, but this was war. And war is a horrible thing. If you don't want to know the details, look away until I tell you that it's safe to carry on reading. Rufus grabbed a razor-sharp piece of twisted metal that had once been part of a door frame to the boiler room, if you must know, and cut through his leg. And yes, he did have to hack through his own bone as the rising water around him reddened with his own blood. And at the end of it, he fainted, but he floated free and was rescued by some of his own men who'd made it to a lifeboat. They stemmed the bleeding. People never stop the bleeding in war stories. They always stem it. And fortunately for Rufus, help was close at hand and he survived. The downside was that he was a changed man. What Rufus McNally went through was unbelievably dreadful. I'd be a liar to tell you otherwise. But other people have been through even worse and somehow come out the other side as decent human beings. Rufus McNally, however, became bitter, sick, and twisted, in that order. He'd tried twisted, bitter, and sick, but it didn't suit him. And it was then that he started to D-R-I-N... Oh, hang on, I almost forgot. It's okay to start reading again, you squeamish ones. From being a popular hero, Rufus turned his back on all his old friends and colleagues who wanted to be alone. He had his war pension, and whenever he needed a bit more money, he'd have his wife, after she died, Jackie, sell another of his many medals. Poor Jackie. That was just another one of her jobs. No wonder she got a bit snappy sometimes. Fergal and the other kids, his twin brothers Joshua and Albie, and his sister LaFay, sometimes called Jackie Jackal, which may have seemed a bit mean. Wouldn't you snap and snarl once in a while with 4 younger siblings to look after and no life of your own? Probably. Although there may, of course, have been more to her name than that. Those of you who read on shall see. But I'm pretty sure they all loved each other. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that I expect Jackie, Joshua, Albie, and LaFay, or if you'd prefer them in alphabetical order, Albie, Jackie, Joshua, and LaFay, were really upset when their little brother Fergal ended up all dead like that. Splat. The sad thing was that things were looking up for the McNally family at the time Fergal took a nosedive from the window. For a start, it was a hotel window from which Fergal fell, and although Fergal's other sister, LaFay, was the only person who was supposed to be occupying the hotel room, it was a single, they'd never been in the position before in which even one of them could legitimately spend the night in a hotel. And the Dell was quite a posh one. LaFay had entered a typing competition and won her local and regional finals. Now she was in the national grand finals, and that meant a trip to the capital and a night in the Dell. What is a typing competition, you may well ask? Well, although I've never actually been in one myself, because I can only type with 2 fingers, I think you'll find it's a competition to see who can type the fastest, making the fewest mistakes, whilst still laying all the words neatly on the page, that kind of thing. Now, it may not sound like the most exciting thing to you. You may think that a kickboxing competition or a fight with laser swords or a motorcycle competition might be more interesting. But it was a typing competition LaFay had entered and reached the finals in, and there's nothing I can do to change that. Anyhow, her brothers and sister were very proud of her. Of course, their father wasn't in the least bit proud of her or her typing abilities. It wasn't the typing part. He wouldn't have been in the least bit proud if LaFay had run a mile in under 1 second or performed successful brain surgery on 3 patients all at once, either. He was excused from being a parent, remember? All he cared about was himself. When LaFay asked if she could go to the grand finals, she hadn't told him about the locals or regionals, he said that he didn't care what she did. When Jackie suggested that the rest of them go with LaFay to give her support, their father said he wasn't going anywhere, and if he wasn't going anywhere, none of the others was going anywhere either. So Jackie made a stand. She was a grown woman, old enough to be Fergal's mother, and had looked after all of them, including her father, long enough to make an important decision on her own. She took the money she'd been putting aside from her already meager housekeeping budget each week. The plan had been to save up enough money to buy the others a small present each come Christmas, and found that she had enough to buy just 2 round-trip bus tickets to the capital. LaFay would be traveling up to town by train at the expense of Tap and Type, the sponsors of the typing competition, but there was no way Jackie could afford to buy 2 train tickets. The 2 bus tickets were for her and for Albie and Joshua. The reason why Albie and Joshua only got 1 ticket between them was that they were almost identical twins. Jackie hoped that if they kept on the move and took it in turns to hide in the loo, the bus driver would think that they were one and the same person. That left Fergal without a ticket. There were 2 options here. They could either hide him in their luggage or dress him up as a baby so that he could travel for nothing. When the time came, Fergal found himself in the bus on Jackie's lap with a big nappy, which is a diaper only spelled N-A-P-P-Y instead of D-A-I-P-E-R, on his bottom and a Sherlock Holmes comic book in his hand. Sitting next to them, a man with a mustache eyed Fergal's reading material. "Bright kid," he said. The mustache said nothing. Although the bus left 2 hours before the train, it was due to arrive an hour and a half after it, so LaFay arranged to meet them at the back of the Dell at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Here's a picture of them getting on the bus. There was no way Jackie, Fergal, Albie, and Joshua could simply march into the building with their luggage, even if Fergal was pretending to be a baby and Albie and Joshua were pretending to be one and the same person. The management of the Dell would suspect that there was something funny going on. Funny peculiar, not funny ha-ha. No, LaFay would have to find a way of smuggling them up to her room. LaFay had been met at the station by a man called Malcolm, which, by the way, is the name of a stuffed stoat in another series of books I wrote, starting with A House Called Awful End, and which I'd be very grateful if you'd rush out and buy. Malcolm Kent was from the publicity department of Tap and Type, and it was his job to meet the 4 finalists off their 4 respective trains. "You're the last," Malcolm explained, taking LaFay's rather tatty-looking suitcases. Old suitcases in novels are nearly always battered. This was tatty. The piece of cod the McNallys shared later that evening was definitely battered, though, so you fans of battering have nothing to fear. "The other finalists are already back at the hotel," he said. Malcolm had a taxi waiting, and he held the door open for LaFay to get into the back. LaFay had never been in the capital before, had never been in a taxi before, and had never stayed in a hotel before. This, she thought as she settled down in the comfy seat, is going to be a trip to remember. It was, but sadly for the wrong reason. This was going to be the trip where Fergal ended up very squashed and very dead. That is the end of chapter 1.